Hi, I'm Adrienne Brown, and joining me today are Anna Hutsell and Laura McGowan, and we make up a larger team at Guardian, a strategic communications agency serving faith-driven leaders and organizations. And today we're going to be talking about crisis communications, what a PR crisis is, what to do if you encounter one or one strikes, and even some tangible steps you can take to hopefully avoid one altogether. But to kick us off, I think I'm going to hand it to you, Anna, and have you kind of lay the groundwork for us here on what we're talking about when we talk about a PR crisis. What is it? How do we define it? And maybe even give some recent examples of crises that we've helped work on.
Mm-hmm. That's a great question. The first thing that's important to establish is something a crisis or is it an issue? An issue is something that you could resolve in your day-to-day. And while if it's unchecked, Henry Kissinger actually once said that an issue ignored is a crisis invited. If unchecked, it can escalate. On its own, it doesn't kind of rise to the caliber of a crisis. A crisis is something that can affect your reputation or disrupt your operations. So now that we've established kind of what the difference is between an issue and a crisis, there are many different types of crises, from acts of God like natural disasters or things like that to management issues, moral failures. Human error, crimes and legal issues. Unfortunately, the possibilities really are endless.
Yeah. And I mean, I think it's helpful for people to hear, I guess, like the variety or the spectrum of how some of these go. And some of them are things that feel like you could potentially avoid them, and other things feel like they really are out of your control. But I think that the word or the term PR crisis has a lot of connotations for certain people. And, we see a lot of movies or we read books, and I think they're largely misunderstood. So what would you say? I mean, if you had to put an idea around what you think are some of the common misunderstandings about PR crises, what would you say?
That is a good thought. I think for me, the biggest misconception about crises is that people think they're immune. There are lots of organizations that still feel like this will happen to somebody else, but it won't happen to me. And what you mentioned earlier, if it's something is within your control or out of your control, sometimes a crisis is something that has happened within your organization because of a mistake. Other times it's something out of bounds that, happened in your area, thinking back to, weather-related incidences or things like that. And, with our current culture, frankly, time has shown that virtually every, Christian or faith-friendly organization is going to experience a crisis of some sort.
Yeah. And a common misconception too, I think, is that a crisis just comes out of nowhere and blindsides you, but that's not really the case at all, with perhaps several small exceptions. But in reality, those organizations that are ready for it and that put in a little bit of preparedness will come out the other side.
Yeah. And I want to add something to what she just said, because that's a great point, Laura. When we were talking earlier about, things that seemingly are out of your control, like weather, maybe something did feel like it came out of nowhere, but she really hit the nail on the head with organizations that are prepared. So there's got to be a plan in place. And I know that we're going to dig into that, but there's got to be a plan in place. So even something that might actually feel like it's happening to you and you are not in control of, there is a degree to which you can still control your situation and your organization's response.
Yeah, I feel like at least what we've seen, the idea of the crisis coming out of nowhere that like jumps out and scares you and takes over your organization, it isn't as true as people think or as common. And I think that y'all both kind of brought up, like, there are a few things that might be brewing underneath the surface. There might be red flags that people could be aware of. What would you say are some of those common red flags that an organization could be on the lookout for to be prepared and not be caught off guard?
Well, I think one of them is unhealthy teams. If you notice that people are leaving, if you notice that there are rumblings, persistent rumors, that's one thing to think about. And then talking about persistent rumors, we often say where there's smoke, there's fire. So that's worth exploring. And then also any negative feedback from stakeholders and partners.
Yeah. The best time to prepare for a crisis is now, while you have the time to do so before any sort of incident has occurred. So once you notice those red flags, if you don't already have a strategy or a plan in place, to go ahead and spend the time and effort into some sort of, communications plan or management plan. And also, I think that people overlook how valuable having goodwill toward your organization is. So remember, the best defense is a good offense. So organizations need to be, pursuing positive coverage, whether it be media coverage or not, but sharing good content so that should a crisis ever happen, there is this bank of goodwill so that people know the good things about your organization in addition to this negative situation that may have just occurred.
But how would an organization get started on getting prepared? Like, what are the steps they could take besides just kind of thinking about red flags and, some of the, like you mentioned a strategic plan or a communications plan for a crisis. Like, what do you do to get that process going? How do you jumpstart it?
Yeah, well, we love Ben Franklin quotes. They're actually really erudite in this case. But one that we quote a lot is, by failing to prepare, you're preparing to fail. Planning is the only phase of an incident that you can control. So there are some things that you can do to lean that way. And one is to have an established crisis plan, which is really, really important to round up the policies, procedures, and all the people who are involved. And then another thing is to develop issues-based messaging. And then also just to identify a spokesperson, whether it's the leader or another staff member of the organization.
And, just in case we've scared people out of the gate, I do want to underscore that crises, while maybe the onset of one is negative, don't have to stay negative. There have been case studies in which a crisis situation actually turned out to be an opportunity for an organization because they did all the steps that Laura just described. Historically, the kind of gold star case study is Tylenol. So back in the 80s, sadly, somebody poisoned some Tylenol capsules on shelves, and tragically, several people died after ingesting the poisoned capsules. So Johnson & Johnson, the parent company, and Tylenol really were proactive in remediating the crisis. So they very quickly pulled their products off shelves, distributed and communicated warnings to just the general marketplace. They not only offered refunds, but they also swapped out the poisoned capsules, the capsules in general that had been yanked for tablets. And then most notably, now when we go and get, medication from the pharmacy, we notice that there is that, film to provide, tamper-proof. Yeah. And so they seemingly changed the industry and the safety protocols. And so, Tylenol, as we all know today, is doing just fine. People still use the medication, and this is not a crisis that, haunted them for a long time.
Right.
And so, while I don't want to underscore how tragic it was and that lives were lost, it was just a great crisis response to show that the organization really did care about its consumers, and they were able to turn such a deadly and terrible situation into one that could ensure that their brand and their company could continue into the future.
Yeah. I mean, and I think that's a good point that we're trying to say. I think if you do the preparation, if you do the work, then there is a chance not only of surviving, but actually this becoming something that helps your organization or company thrive in the end. But I guess we've talked a little bit about preparation, and I want to talk more about I guess something that would help someone navigate when an actual crisis hits. So they're in the thick of it. Something's happened. I don't know, some situation. And are there any kind of guiding philosophies or principles that you immediately think through when you're trying to say, okay, here's how you can survive. Here's how you can do it well. Here's how you can kind of do what Tylenol did.
Yeah, I think the best principle is ownership. research shows that people really value and trust those who take ownership of situations, even if they weren't responsible for causing it. So obviously Tylenol is a great example of that. They didn't cause the issue, but they took ownership of it. There's another case study of Domino's. Many years ago, a local Domino's franchisee had employees that uploaded.
Oh yeah.
Remember it was real gross.
Yeah.
They uploaded video of themselves doing unimaginable things to pizza and then it going out the door to be delivered. So instead of the president of Domino's just kind of blaming it on the franchisee owner and trying to separate himself, he was really proactive in not only taking ownership, but then making sure that the communications that went out from the company was also placed in places where people could find it. So that's where we show that's where we see that he really had a strategic response. So a lot of the videos that had been circulated were on YouTube. And so when he takes ownership, he puts that video on YouTube. So people who are searching for the video then find it and know, what's Domino's think about this? And, there were other things they did, social media accounts that they set up and things like that. But I just think that's a great example of owning something that, it wasn't a Domino's wide problem. It was a franchisee issue, but he chose to take ownership.
Yeah.
Yeah, absolutely. I think too, we could dive into vulnerability assessments and the role that those can play for an organization. We've worked with a lot of organizations to develop them, and it really is to help them figure out what the biggest threats are to their reputation. And working with different organizations, we have been able to meet with their staff to get an idea of their organizational culture, to review policies and procedures, and really to provide a roadmap more or less to what they can do to avoid those risks.
Yeah. And I think you brought up the employee aspect of this, which I think is really critical, because I think that a lot of people think about a crisis and they think this happens, so now we're going to talk outwardly and we're going to talk only to the general public or our donors or whatever. And they forget or often neglect to address the people that are really their core, brand ambassadors. These are the people that day in, day out live out your organization. They work there. And if you can equip them to respond well, then they are actually going to be really helpful in helping you navigate the crisis. And so I think that, not only getting them equipped in the preparation phase, but being able to align your message when something's happened, like this Domino's example, not only talking perfectly to YouTube and talking to the general public, but also talking to your employees and your staff and helping them know, here's what happened, here's how we're responding, here's what you can do to be part of the change. Making sure all of those are in alignment can really, I think we've seen make or break, once the dust settles and you're past the crisis, what happens next. So it's almost like that portion of it is really focused on the recovery. But I want to talk about that a little bit, because there is so much of a flurry of activity around something's happened. There's so much attention, but then hours or days, months pass by and the dust settles. So what would you say to an organization that has experienced a crisis, maybe in the past or recent past? What do they do after the fact? What do they do once the dust settles?
Yeah, that's a good question. Part of it is really the first step, rebuilding the broken trust. And that's really either external with stakeholders or internally. And then identifying any gaps that might have arisen so you can avoid those in the future. And then really just timing of when is a good time to start a public relations plan after that.
Yeah. And I'll jump onto that. So her last point, the timing for figuring out when you're going to be proactive with your PR again and telling other stories. You're not going to know any of that if you weren't already monitoring. So let's go back just a little bit. Even before a crisis starts, you should have monitoring for your brand set up. So what's being said about you online from traditional news and social media, and then also having, a third party or somebody else that, in addition to what's being said, to be able to weigh the sentiment and really analyze that data. So that's great, because not only does it help you see if something is escalating to a crisis, it also gives you a good baseline so that you would then be able to determine, kind of like your question was, has the dust settled? And then how long has the dust settled? Is this the right time for us to kind of, turn the ship and now focus on our proactive communications goals? But I can't underscore the importance of monitoring enough. And then again, having someone who is able to analyze that data. Sadly, Google Alerts are just not enough. You need somebody to be able to really read between the lines of that information. And I think that's a very valuable tool for just being a good manager of your brand in general, and then also for navigating a crisis.
That's great. Yeah, those are great. Okay. So I think we'll shift gears as we close out the convo, but I have a couple of lightning round style questions. I'm going to ask you quick questions. You can think about them and then answer them with the first thing that comes to mind. I'll try to answer them too, but I just have a couple that I'm going to make sure we wedge in, because they are common questions we get about crises and how to do this, how to navigate crisis. So the first one, y'all ready? Okay. First one. What's the one tool you can't live without during a crisis? One tool. Just one.
Okay. One tool. A regular cadence of real-time collaboration with the crisis team, so everybody knows what's going on and can respond accordingly.
Okay. Anna? I'm thinking about mine.
I'm going to say coffee.
No. Nice.
No, I mean, it's, a boring answer, but sometimes the simplest answers are the best ones. I would say my phone. Obviously, like having communication and hearing from the client or from your colleagues is critical, and just being able to very quickly get in touch with people, get status updates, things like that. So
I think mine, I'm going to say, to piggyback a little bit off of what you were talking about with monitoring, I feel like that's so big, because one of the first questions I feel like we asked, we're trying to gauge a pulse of the situation. Like, what is the temperature in the room? And I think that's one way you can actually do that. And also, I mean, it's not a tool, but in a way, I really do think that we rely heavily on, how is a staff feeling? How's this, this is almost like a family for an organization. So how is everyone feeling? What is their kind of first response to what's going on? And that can kind of, if you layer that with some monitoring tools, then you can really get a better kind of healthy read on what's really going on out there, rather than just maybe the loudest voices. It'll be more of a, kind of regulated understanding of what's happening.
Yeah.
All right. So, okay. Next question. Here we go. What's one thing you wish every organization did to prepare for a crisis? If they did one thing. Because you mentioned a bunch. I want you to kind of pick one.
Narrowing it down.
Just narrow it to one thing.
I would say a vulnerability assessment.
Okay, tell us really what that means, or what would you say, what does that entail in terms of if you wanted to just get one started?
Yeah. Great question. Because I know we've mentioned it a few times. And so you might be wondering, what are they talking about?
Yeah.
Vulnerability assessments are wonderful. So we come in and we look at any marketing collateral we can get our hands on, in addition to any procedures and policies that your organization already has determined.
Okay.
In addition to that, we will interview a percentage of your staff that we kind of determine based on your size. And so by the, data review that we're getting from what you already are either saying about yourself, what you already are doing to protect yourself, and then hearing from people from your executive vice president to your janitor who might know that there is a door that is always unlocked that should definitely not be unlocked. From talking to a variety of people in different positions, we are really able to determine some areas of concern for your organization that kind of earlier, how we were talking about an issue versus a crisis, those might be issues. But almost more importantly, because of the urgency, is the vulnerabilities and potential crises facing your organization. So at that point, then once we know what we're dealing with, then we can better help you navigate or mitigate that problem.
Okay. Okay, so the question again.
That was a good
What's
answer.
the one thing you wish every organization did to prepare in advance?
Yeah, this might seem overly simple, but it's really not. It's just making sure that you have a plan in place.
Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay, any type of starting point is
Yes.
good.
And that people know that you have one.
Yeah.
Yes.
That's true.
Yeah. In doing the vulnerability assessments or even just in conversation with our clients, a lot of times we hear things like, oh, yeah, I think there's a policy, but I don't know what it is.
Mhm.
Yeah. And that's not helpful.
Yeah.
Mhm.
I think that if I had to, every time I feel like I've wished that an organization would have, this isn't even crisis related, but more so had messaging training unrelated to crises, like just having those foundational messages about your organization down and knowing how to, how to talk about who you are, why you exist. Those core things that make up who you are is really helpful, because then when you're actually going through a crisis, you already have the foundation laid, like the groundwork is there so you can speak about whatever's going on. Okay, so then one more question, then we'll end.
I'm ready.
All right. This one's hard, Anna. All right. If you had to give one word of advice, and I mean that literally, you're going to give me one word of advice to an organization experiencing a crisis, what would you say? What's your word that you want them to kind of like focus on?
Truth.
Okay.
With a capital
good.
T.
Yeah. All right. No explanation needed.
Mine is trust.
Okay. Okay. And then I'm going to break my own rule. I'm going to pick two words, but they're separate. I think calm is so important because you're just in a storm, truly, and it can feel unnerving. But having a sense of calm and peace, knowing that there is a plan, you're going through this all together. There is another side to this that you'll come out on the other side is important. And then I think we come back to this of empathy, of having empathy with every different audience and every different voice along the way is really important. So
I think calm is great. I am a parent of small children, and Sissy Goff has a quote about when a child is having a tantrum. I don't know if you know this, but toddlers apparently experience crises multiple times a day, that you, the parent, are to remain the calmest person in the room. And I think that's true for leaders as well, because if they are communicating calm and that there's a plan, then their staff not only receive that, but then can also emulate that and, share that with the general public or whoever they come in contact with.
Yes, we will. That's how we're going to close. That's what I want to close with today. So thank you so much. Thank you for joining us. You can learn more about crisis communications at guardian.agency and reach out to us to just keep the conversation going. Thanks for joining.